Hi, this is Shane Starr, and today we are on our 8th and final video of a series where I combine my passion for typology with my experience in education and philosophy to help any of my 4 or 5 viewers maximize their growth and help them on their journey towards self-actualization. And I've already mentioned this in my other videos, but in keeping with the rest of them, I want to go over our method for doing this is targeting specific functions or elements in MBTI and Socionics. And the ones we're not focusing on the ones we're great at already, and we're not focusing on the one that we're really trash at. We're focusing on those middle ones, the ones where we're good enough to get better in, and we are not good enough such that we can benefit from getting better at. In MBTI, we're looking at our tertiary and inferior functions as well as our 8th slot demon function. In Socionics, that would be our mobilizing function, our suggestive function, and then the one that corresponds with the 8th function is called the role function. How these play out in your cognitive stack are dealt with in other videos of my own and others, so if you need help, look there. So today we're doing NI, that is Introverted Intuition. And again, my methodology here is that I look at my most trusted sources from both MBTI and Socionics sources. Where they differ, I look for other correlations, and then the outlying descriptions I bracket out. So we are left with like a Venn diagram, what's in the middle, and that's what we stick with. So I think, I spent most of my efforts here trying to synthesize the MBTI notion of NI, patterns, connections, themes, symbolism, insight, with the Socionics notion of time and how elements in the past and present lead to discernible outcomes in the future. And I'm thinking, how do I bring these two distinct yet similar notions of introverted intuition together? And for me, the overlap comes in that we have a sense of what's meaningful outside of empirical objects, things, or people. So we're looking for meaning. I think that's a big key. And I would go on to say, the most important things about us in life lie outside of that empirical realm. I can know who you are by your name, your birth, even your DNA, your height, your weight, where you live, and I really don't know anything about you. Everything that makes us who we are as humans, our loves, our hopes, our dreams, our fears, what we hold most important and what's significant in our lives, all of these are beyond the empirical world, so to speak. So I think introverted intuition lives in that realm, outside of the ordinary, outside of the empirical world. And the way this connects with time is that when things transcend the particular place, they tend to transcend the particular moment as well, thus the entrance of time into our definition. And I think this comes as an insight, or maybe even a premonition of what will be in the future. So what are some examples of struggling with this function that deals with themes, symbolism, insight, and time? I think it's a failure to understand the significance of people, things, or places, or moments. A lot of times people, I think, with really bad NI tend to look back and not realize when they were at a crossroads in their lives. This was a big moment here and you didn't catch it. That was a big moment there and you missed it. This was a big moment over here and you blew it. Those kinds of things. I think people who have high NI are able to recognize those moments and the significance of those moments better. I would say on the surface level, I'd say failure to understand the themes of either historical events or even literature or movies they watch. When I was a teacher, I always focused on theme. Like, here's a story. What can we learn from this? What are we learning about life here? What is the author, whether it was a Twilight Zone episode or something as, like Romeo and Juliet, what's the lesson we learn here? And I think if you miss that and you don't look for that, it's probably indicative of low introverted intuition, and it's a sign that maybe you should work on it. I would also say failure to recognize patterns, not just regular pencil and paper patterns or patterns in literature, but behavioral patterns. I would say patterns in culture as well. Seeing the ebb and flow of how things work, like with politics. We swing far liberal, and then the reaction is we get conservative. Hopefully find a good middle ground, which seems impossible in 2025, but maybe time will tell. We'll find our way after all. But failure to recognize patterns is indicative of poor introverted intuition. And I would say failure to grasp abstract concepts like time, theology, philosophy. I would say personal conversion, whether it's good or bad, seeing a change in someone's spirit and someone's personality by way of, a significant event in their lives, sort of just sticking to your same idea of this is this, that is that, and not being flexible enough to account for a change. I think that's indicative of low introverted intuition. I would also say the failure to understand symbols, analogies, any kind of non-literal interpretation or understanding of things. That would be low introverted intuition. So with that, let's go to our author. I think the greatest author in the history of human existence, greatest human author anyway, and that would be William Shakespeare. I think he needs no introduction. I think he's so much on top that his literary works are so beyond others in terms of their power, breadth, and scope that I think not only does he need no introduction, but I think we almost take Shakespeare for granted. If someone says, Shane, who's your favorite author? And I say Shakespeare, it's almost like, okay, who's really your favorite author? Like, people, I think, need to stop and really take that in. He's known for his 4 great tragedies: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Also Romeo and Juliet. And I would say these tragedies capture every aspect of human existence, every meaningful aspect, and even the more nasty common ones as well. Love, hate, jealousy, life, death, religion, philosophy, deception, humor, sex, violence, revenge, forgiveness. It's all there, and in more than one play as well. I could have chosen a number of plays for today's presentation, but I chose Hamlet. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. And with that, I think the reason I chose Hamlet is because the main character, Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, is usually typed as a lead introverted intuition type. Sometimes INFJ, sometimes INTJ, but either way, lead introverted intuition. And so in Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, the ghost of Hamlet's father reveals to him that he was murdered by his own brother, Hamlet's uncle, Claudius, who then marries Hamlet's mom. So, he finds out about the marriage first, and he thinks it's kind of sus, he doesn't really like it. And then he's revealed, this truth by his dead father in a dream that, yes, I was murdered by my brother, avenge me. And so Hamlet, feeling grief, having doubt, dealing with the moral implications of revenge, he starts with a plan to avenge his father's death. And first he fakes being crazy so he can kind of gather evidence, and people will, kind of overlook what he's really doing, which is gathering evidence to really be certain. And what happens in the connection with introverted intuition here is that ultimately each of the characters' actions ironically lead to results that they didn't want, and in the end all the main players are dead. And that's the surface level of what happens in the story. So let's look at some, I can't tell the whole story here, but let's look at some main takeaway quotes. One of them, I think, and it's overlooked, it is, there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. In other words, our ultimate destiny belongs to God, but we get to fill out the details. In one way, it's like, hey, we get to participate in our destiny by freedom of choice. But in another realm, you could say you can't escape your fate either. So we could dive deep into that, but we won't do that here. Another one, a man may fish with the worm that hath eaten of a king, and eat of the fish that hath fed of that worm. In other words, just the cycle of life and the irony of it. It's the king ends up being on the same circle of life as the worm. None of us really matter that much, at least in the physical sense of things. Sort of a sobering thought. And another one, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Another introverted intuition remark. And I saved the main quote for last. This one's a little bit longer depending on how much of it I read out of the play itself. But one of the main themes that Hamlet's dealing with, and this is another hallmark of people who lead with introverted intuition, is that even though he's pretty much certain about his uncle being guilty, and he does want to avenge his father's death, he keeps putting it off. He's basically, procrastinating. And it's like, why? And it's because he's not sure, but he is sure, but he's not sure. And procrastination is subject of commentary centuries long. You can find it anywhere on the internet. But one of the most famous quotes, the most famous quote, it hits on this, and it asks the question of whether it's even worth it to do any of it. It's like, I'm gonna die anyway, why even try? What's it all mean? What's it all worth? And here we go. Here's the quote. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of trouble and by opposing end them. I'll stop there. He goes along to ponder whether it's better to live or die, both in this instant and in a greater sense overall. And it's this very consciousness of death that he goes on to say, thus conscious doth make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over the pale cast of thought, and enterprises with great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. In other words, the more you think about it, you lose the moment to act, and you lose the will to act. And maybe this brings us full circle back to SE. Sometimes in life you just have to do it. You have to jump in. We're never going to be all the way sure. And so when you ask yourself to be or not to be, do it quickly. All right, so what are some new perspectives on introverted intuition that we can bring from the great play Hamlet? I would say, if nothing else, introverted intuition is elusive. Hamlet, as we know, usually typed as an NI lead, is stuck between premonition, conviction, and acting on it. Time, the future, keeping the long game in mind, trusting your intuition means nothing if you don't act on it. Hamlet's failure to act quickly results not only in his own death, but in the death of others that he loves. And their plans also, they delay in their own way, and that brings about their own downfall. Like Claudius wanted to get rid of Hamlet. He didn't, and then that allows Hamlet to kill him in the end, taking all the moral considerations aside. So the better we're able to recognize patterns and themes in life, in our own lives, it'll help us be successful in our, not only in our endeavors, but it'll also save us from personal tragedy. Being able to see what you want to do in the moment that might feel good in the moment, usually something bad, and look at the long game and realize what's going to happen later from this act. What will the consequences be? That might just save you, So I would say introverted intuition is necessary for longevity as well as happiness. And, again, it's sort of how we begin, but ultimately it's not how we begin, it's how we end that counts. And as such, we should order our actions accordingly. All right, so what are some changes we can make to introverted intuition moving forward that'll make us happier in the end? I would say flashes of insight, take note of them. Try to do some form of meditation. I don't even like the word meditate. I don't mind prayer. I like prayer. I live on prayer, spiritually speaking. That's my form of meditation. You have to have something that helps center yourself and give you space to experience those insights as they come. I would say look for patterns and connections that are not necessarily related to the here and now. Imagine yourself with no limits. What would that be like? What would you do if nothing was holding you back? And then once you figure that out, see if there is something you might be able to do about it. Sit in a place where you'll have little distractions and focus on your life, the meaning of life. Think of your life as a board game. Where are you at right now? What moves are no longer options for you given your place in life, and which ones still are options, and are some of those options worth pursuing? Look at consider things from other perspectives. Look at other people's perspectives of events. There's a story about a mouse that gets defecated on by a larger animal, and he thinks it's the worst day of his life, only to find out later that his friend walking next to him who wasn't defecated on was eaten by an eagle. So what he thought was the worst thing in his life ended up being the most blessed day of his life. He didn't recognize it at the time. Look at things that have happened in your life. There are a lot of blessings in disguise. I'm sure of it. I know there are in mine. Try right before going to sleep at night, asking your inner conscience to help you solve a problem, and then in the morning see if you've made any headway on it. Look towards the future for how things might be, and try to organize your actions to meet that projected self in the future. Whether it's a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. Use projection as a tool. Think of your life as a movie and you can fast forward and reverse it even if necessary. Consider your life as a whole. Where are you out of balance? Envision taking an action that would help you regain that balance. I would say also look at any goal you're working towards and think, that we might be getting into TE here, but look towards more efficient ways of resetting yourself and moving in a positive direction towards that goal. As far as the news you take in, the literature you read, the songs you listen to, the movies you watch, listen to what they mean. What's the message there? What do they symbolize? What can you learn from these things? I think that's really important. Think about what things ultimately symbolize for you. What is the concept of motherhood or fatherhood or brother or sisterhood to you? If you have an ultimate reality like God, what is the meaning of God to you? What is that relationship ideally supposed to look like? And consider it. I would say perhaps the most important part of introverted intuition would be to see things, and especially your own life, thematically. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of your life? Visualize it. Think of how the past, the present, and future all come together. Visualize your best life, your best self, and focus on making that dream and vision a reality. That's all I have for today. Next up is Enneagram. These videos I hope will be just as good, maybe even better, a little bit more concise, a little bit shorter now that I've had some practice on these. Let me know what you think in the comments. Peace out.